Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SOPHIA webinar on cumulative impacts. We are so happy that you could join us today. I am Sandra Whitehead. I am president of SOPHIA, and it's my pleasure to welcome Charles Lee and his colleague Rich Paiste from the US EPA. To talk to us, actually to have a follow-up conversation from our initial conversation at the practitioner workshop. You'll recall, if you were able to be there, that Charles was our keynote speaker, and he brought this conversation the EPA is having around how to assess and address cumulative impacts in communities to SOPHIA. And today he and Rich are going to share an update and talk to us about their work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Charles, to sort
Okay,
of introduce yourself and to introduce Rich.
great. Thank you, Sandra. And hello, everyone. It's really great to be back. And I really appreciate your taking the time, you're showing the interest and taking the time to talk with us about a set of ideas that are I guess under development. Trying to figure out ways to uh, have to address and to assess for and address cumulative impacts is a pretty difficult thing, and we've learned a lot from how this is being done through specific examples like the General Iron RMG Southside Recycling permit assessment done through HIA and by the Chicago Department of Public Health. And we learned a lot from how different states are approaching it, and trying to apply that is what we're trying to what we're trying to do here. So let me just bring up some slides, and I thought, Sandra, what we would do is just walk through them. Rich and I would just walk it through with people, and in that process really have some conversation, and make this pretty informal.
That's perfect, Charles.
Okay, great. And I don't know how many people are here. There's something like
Almost 50.
almost 50 people. Okay, great. Okay, so uh this is did okay, I have this, and now I gotta share this. Um is that you guys
Yes,
see it?
we
Is
can see it.
You can see it? Okay, great. Okay, so let me just bring this up and just so so we're calling this a process model, and it's very much in development. And it helps us structure our thinking in terms of how you would do a assessment for cumulative impacts that leads to action or set of actions. And so I think one of the things I talked about in my presentation when I spoke with you last was this idea of fit for purpose. Fit for purpose, as you know, is that different decision contexts, different requires different types of analysis, different scale of analysis, different degrees of quantification to help inform that. We've seen this really evolve in the EJ space over the last 10-15 years, in the emergence of EJ mapping tools that were, as this slide shows, if you start on the left hand side, these mapping tools were originally only intended for identifying places where you do greater outreach or analysis or other type of investigation. Um, and um, but we found that um, when, say, starting in California with the Senate Bill 535, which stipulated that 25% of the greenhouse gas reduction funds will go to disadvantaged, quote unquote, disadvantaged communities, that you can actually use that kind of information that was in these EJ mapping tools like Cal and Screen in that case for allocation of resources and for prioritization of different types of program attention. Um, that when that was replicated in several states, and now there's almost like 20, more than 20 EJ mapping tools of that type. But that was replicated in other states in terms of allocation of resources, and now um, it was been adopted at the federal level in the Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of a set of federal resources will go to disadvantaged communities. Um, um, and and um, um, and so it is not true that cumulative impact is not being considered in environmental decision making. Um, it is, however, um, true that as we move in this in the slide, you can see those areas, that part of the spectrum where I have highlighted in green, that as you move towards a more regulatory decision context, like permitting or like rulemaking, certain types of cleanup remedy decisions or others, that that you that different kinds of analysis is going to be needed, um, and um, and so that is, I think, the challenge in terms of what it means to develop and operationalize a cumulative impact framework. Um, so that's the first thing. Sandra, do you want me to stop there and have a conversation? Have any questions, or do you want to? We can move on.
Why don't we go ahead and stop there for a moment, Charles, since
Okay.
we have an hour and a half. We've got a good crowd here too. So I can sort of look and see if you want to raise your hands if you have questions or comments at this point. All right, I'm not seeing any, Charles. Why don't we go ahead then?
Okay. So the other point I made, just in terms of background to this process model, is that we uh we called we called the or we uh thought about the EPA's cumulative impact framework as something that was decision centered, that it would help us make better decisions so that no community would bear a disproportionate share of adverse environmental public health consequences, or that we would be working with communities to establish a pathway towards health and livability. And so because because of that, we thought it'd be really important to dig into and understand um, uh, better the kinds of context in which we make these decisions. And this is more than just understanding or focusing on those decisions which can make a difference, and the kinds of authorities that we operate under, understanding, of course, the roles and responsibilities of various decision makers, and but you also need to understand the various relationships and coordination needs between agencies and with communities and stakeholders, understanding what what it means to have a good baseline characterization of the disproportionate, multiple, and cumulative impacts in a community involving an understanding of historical and structural drivers for the concentration of environmental burden, understanding the needs and concerns of impacted communities. This calls to brings to mind the need to have robust, meaningful community engagement and clarity about what kind of analysis is needed to inform the pertinent decision structures. So those are some of the things that we thought were important to keep in mind. And this plays itself out in the way that we thought about the different ways that the different kind of steps that we need to go through in terms of a cumulative impact assessment. The graphic here is meant to show that is a very and this is an oversimplified kind of depiction of the complexity of decisions and factors and stressors at work in any given situation, particularly at a community context. And so whenever you're talking about informing or dealing with one decision, there's always other decisions and certainly other influences in terms of the health and well-being of that community. And so at some point, then we have to figure out how to navigate that. And so that's why we're saying that we need to have a decision framework that is going to address individual decisions as well as multiple decisions across multiple programs and agencies, and that we need to do this in a way that is transparent, that engages communities, and has a strong partner and stakeholder engagement. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of our thinking in terms of what a process frame for a cumulative impact assessment has gains a lot from HIAs and the practice health impact assessments and the practice of HIAs. So let me just stop there. Rich, did you want to add anything to what I just said?
Well, first, can you hear me?
No, you got to speak.
No, right? Can I hear me?
I can hear you, but
I
it's
can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
great.
How about now? Is that better?
That's a lot better.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, all right, that's great, but I don't have anything to add at that point. No,
I'm sorry?
I don't have anything to add.
Oh, okay, great.
right
Okay.
now.
Well, he's gonna have a lot more to say later. Okay, any questions, Sandra?
I'm not seeing any hands at this point, Charles.
Okay, so now we start to get into this idea that what are critical, probably the word elements may not be correctly used, but what are key steps for assessing and addressing cumulative impacts? We thought about this in terms of screening and tiering, in terms of scoping, which involves community engagement and ultimately ending up in your research questions or your analysis questions and the design of your analysis, meaning the tool, the data, and the methods you're going to use to address those questions. Then that concludes then your scoping phase, moving into your analysis, bring to bear different tools that you need, either of a quantitative, semi-quantitative, or qualitative nature. We're finding increasingly the importance of we're finding the importance of the use of mixed methods. The general iron permit health impact assessment did use mixed methods. They used traditional risk assessment. They used cumulative impact assessment. Essentially, use of EJ screening, and then benefits and burdens assessment, something called racial equity impact assessment, leading to, of course, identifying your potential actions and your decisions and development of action plans. So when we talk about decisions and action plans, we're saying that like in the general iron permit example, they did make a decision around the actual permit itself, which was a denial, but they also had a number of recommendations or around addressing upstream factors like zoning and land use planning, like better integration of this in other permitting actions, and even to the point of thinking through a cumulative impact ordinance for the city. So when I said before that we in real life, when you see a particular decision, that may be really front and center in terms of everyone's mind, but there's these other issues and other decisions that need to be made that coexist, and so at some point one needs to think through how you address that, and of course all these elements needs to be used depending on the decision context and other factors. So this is then what this looks like in terms of what when you start to see this in terms of a process frame. And so I mean, Rich, did you want to walk through this for everyone?
Sure. Okay, so I'm audible, I think, right? So, well, this is the general structure. In terms of the general structure, I'll just sort of make some comments, and let me start by saying that clearly this is a mapping directly to HIA, right? And so, I guess one of the questions and thoughts is, oh no, how about now? This is really this is some weird situation. How about now? Is my audio better?
It's a little louder.
Little louder. Okay. I'm not sure what's going on. How about now? Is this better? About as close as I can get. No?
I think we'll have to work with that.
Okay. Let me go with it this way. Really unfortunate that this is the case, but so basically this is a mapping to the HIA model, and it's done that way in order to basically adapt what we see as goals of a consistent, standardized CIA approach that would be applicable across program decision making, so that there's an integration across both EPA's major goals in terms of the EJ action plan, relate also the connections with like CDC and their cross-agency goals, as well as the developmental efforts we have in our screening and mapping tools like EJ Screen. So with that said, the first step there is somewhat different than the classic HIA step, because the way we were conceptualizing this is that a cumulative impact assessment would be expected as a, if you will, a requirement for each decision-making scenario. And there would be essentially, again, like these would be standardized elements that would need to be, you could say, recorded, so that for the initial step, you would have the identification of the community in terms of the EJ Screen ranking relative to other communities, and also consideration of CDC's EJI and SVI. This is similar to what was done in the Chicago HIA. And again, like this is, designed to be able to provide a standard procedure, if you will, across regulatory programs, air, water, permitting, and those kinds of actions, which, are full of specific details, requirements, timelines, and other features. Another piece up front is EPA's goal to apply and consider the external civil rights component for EJ in various communities. So that is a kind of a underlaying or consistent thought or approach to all of these efforts. So that would be like sort of what you call the screening. In the scoping area, we would be talking about different elements. The scoping spans from, the situation, characterization, engagement, and design. There's a lot of elements there. So some of the things that are desired for the outcomes in that regard would be to have a basic pathways diagram for discussion with the community, so that, again, essential kind of core foundational element, everyone is on the same page, and there's a clarity in regard to, what, let's say, chemicals are we talking about, where they travel from, and what health impacts they have, in along with, the community priorities. So basically, that's a key component, as well as specific requirements to ensure that the efforts address language barriers, cultural barriers, and that actions are taken, so that, again, in that regard, actual data in terms of different languages spoken and numbers of folks with those. So, that's easy to like sort of gloss over. So then in terms of the design phase, we would be talking about incorporating specific elements. And if you could bear with me, this is a very awkward trying to talk this way, but they would be things like identification of, just again, simple things that are required to provide consistency and ability to compare and ensure that things are covered, such as a refined pathways diagram, the geographic boundaries considered, emerging and future contaminants and risks that are considered. Specifically, like climate change would be a factor that would need some degree of consideration, and potentially incorporation of a simple run like EPA's ARC-X tool that can provide information. Again, so core sets of information, and in that kind of community. Then moving to the analysis phase, that really, I think, is something that, is always sort of specific to the situation and the community, and sort of comes out of the design and the design aspect that identifies what is critical to the community. I would say that one of the things that would be essential there is, and again, like some of these occur to some degree in other components, but the benefits and burdens analysis. And also, I forgot to mention on the community engagement side, I think that we would have, again, this is sort of like somewhat of a idealized goal for it, would be a vision, would be to provide a certain degree of community access and educational component to the tools that the community would be able to use. If we're there and we're talking and engaging, and we have those resources and we develop them for the community, we should be sharing them. So that was one piece. Going to the back to the characterization. I kind of missed this trying to squeeze in here, but there's talk, right, of the baseline characterization. It's in the HIA essential elements. And so there's a thought we have about potentially connecting baseline, at least, connecting, right? Not limiting, but connecting it to EPA's EJ action plan disparity outcome measures. So it's called the 10 disparity indicators. There's certainly more that are potentially going to be developed, but those disparity indicators are agency goals that if we are looking at communities and we have priority outcome measures to address EJ, we should have some degree of consistency in looking at those outcome measures for across communities. And it's not a big lift, and I think that's part of that is, all of these are feasible within the different levels of analysis, whether it's, desktop or a fully, detailed analysis. And then wrapping up shortly here is the decision, determining potential actions. There's been a research tool called the DecisionScape that we've basically been understanding and learning about with the ORD, and so that basically provides a framework to understand the different decisions and partners and decision makers that can affect those factors in the scenario under review. So, for example, and I know this is pretty standard stuff, right? But the community's concerns, right? They may or may not be directly affected by the regulatory decision, such as a permit. They may have concerns direct, and maybe indirect, and they may not be related. But so sort of this matrix kind of thing of what the direct EPA regulations are that affect the situation, non-EPA but regulated issues that are coming out in the community priorities and pathways diagram, and then unregulated issues, and then of course the goal of addressing them to some degree, or making a plan, or identifying resources, partners that could advance that and move it forward, and then of course optimizing benefits and minimizing harm, with the caveat that and this is like been developed in different models of that sort of walk through the details of this, but no additional impact and burden on an already impacted community. So, in other words, the decision ideally could not just be minimized in terms of additional risk and impact, but that would be actually not allowed or acceptable to have any additional, and it cannot be offset by the benefits. So, uh, just to go back to the initial step and the situation characterization, we talked about using the screening tools that basically can like sort of show the situation of this community, the ranking, the location of it in respect to other communities, but also how was that community identified by the state or by the county? Is it on their list as a identified area, right? Because all of that information is sort of central and fundamental to the just being able to identify the current situation. I think that's probably all. I guess I've said a
No,
lot there, and
no,
hopefully you heard it.
no, that was great, Rich. I think we can, one thing before we leave this particular slide, I thought that it'd be important to note that, there's always been this question around what's the relationship, or how do cumulative risk assessment and cumulative impact assessment, how do they align, how do they differ, I think one of the things that I thought it'd be very important to note from the very beginning is, and this is shown by this graphic down here on the right, bottom right hand side, is that the first phase, the phases of cumulative risk assessment, which tend to be very quantitative and very um is planning, scoping, and problem formulation. That is not that different than what you will see in cumulative impact assessment as a scoping stage, both of which end up with the problem formulation as the goal. And then analysis and interpretation, or risk characterization and recommendations. So I think, structurally speaking, there is an alignment, and it's actually to everyone's interest that they be aligned, so that that we can ensure that they complement each other, and allows us to make the best use of the kind of tools available for better informing decisions. So I think the next slide, actually, Rich, you spoke to a lot of these already, right? And maybe Sandra, um, we can stop here and then use this as a way of talking through if people have questions. And
I think it's really helpful to stop here. We did have some conversation in the chat, and one of the requests, and maybe this will help us look at this slide together, is to give us an example as we walk through. Maybe use the General Iron example, or another example that you know of, to help people sort of give them something tangible.
yeah, that would be great. There's another example. There was another way I wanted to answer that question too, is that we're really hopeful that people take this and start to utilize it to develop real life examples. And EPA put out a set of our grants for government to government grants around to the tune of $1 million a piece. And one of the things that we're seeking to get people to do our cumulative impact analysis using health impact assessment. And so we want to build out a body of practice around this. This isn't the only way to do it. Certain other groups are looking at use of things like the
ACH, right?
KCH model and so they're all different ways to think about cumulative impact assessment, and but clearly we want to develop real life models of this. So in terms of talking through how this played out in the General Iron, let me think. Everybody know the background to General Iron. I can give some background. This was a metal recycling facility that was that was located in what became a pretty wealthy area of Chicago, and it got relocated to the predominantly Black and Hispanic southeast side. It ignited a torrent of protest that led to hunger strikes and, of course, demonstrations and hunger strikes lasting several years, in early 2021, EPA Administrator Michael Regan met with Mayor Lightfoot. This was at the point where the last permit to be issued for before this facility could operate was by the city of Chicago, and that was the Department of Public Health. Mayor Administrator Regan suggested that that they look and do a deeper analysis of the disproportionate and cumulative impacts in that area, and used and perhaps one of the ways of doing so doing that analysis was health impact assessment. And so the Chicago Department of Public Health responded positively and undertook what ended up being a year long process doing that health impact assessment. The authorities that were involved there were the Chicago Department of Public Health has a number of omnibus authorities that were related, that were that kind of governed this, as well as new this is omnibus authorities around protection of public health, and authorities around metal recycling facilities. So so that's what was the background here originally. It also should be said that at the point that CDPH began this assessment, there had already been a lot of community engagement, and so all that was brought to bear, and they say that they would not have been able to make to do this type of analysis if they hadn't built on top of that. Let me just stop there. Rich, did you want to add anything to that in terms of the first part, in terms of their process?
Well, I'd be happy to sort of walk through the process
Sure.
in regard to how they, how that sort of maps onto what we have there. So in terms of the, I'm trying to, if I can share screen, that would kind of help a lot. Trying to.
You want me to take this down?
Sure, but I'm I'm gonna see if I can't put up.
You're a
uh,
co-host, so you should have permission, Rich.
Okay, I have to open it up, and now I see share screen. Yes, and then so I need to get to my document. I'll just use the whole screen, share that, find the document there, and we'll see if that is showing. How's that look? Does that look okay?
We can see your notes slides.
Um,
There you go.
okay. Okay, so the general iron permit, right, was done in the context of the Chicago's Chicago Department of Public Health citywide health EJ. I'm not sure the title, right, but sort of their EJ goal document and strategic plan, and their primary.
So that was in the context of Healthy 2025.
Oh, it was okay.
Healthy Chicago 2025. So
Healthy Chicago.
So that is just to say that a lot of what went into the decision-making process, and when Rich goes through this, it become clear, had a strong element of equity in it.
Right. So there was, the sort of the political will and the political context that supported this whole approach to begin with. And so the main outcome goal for that document was to reduce the gap in life expectancy in across Chicago, which was pretty dramatic. So so the sort of the first steps involved there were the evaluation of I think again mapping this to the process model, right? We haven't actually done this before, so it's a little bit awkward, but so in that very first step, right, there's the sort of background regulatory decision, which was to issue the permit or not, right? That was the regulatory context. The political context was there. Charles described the social and community and business context with all kinds of backlash, concern. There was also identification of that. I think it's the South Side neighborhood as an area of significant environmental justice concerns, just already identified as an area of concern for development in the city planning. So, to go further, let me see. All right, that's the protests, and there was the authorities, right? So this part of that first step is the regulatory authorities, the regulatory requirements, and so the regulation authorities was the I believe it's the who was issuing the permit? Was it the
Chicago
city?
Department of Public Health.
Okay, so the Chicago Department of Public Health was the regulatory authority, and so this action was being undertaken under their guise. And in the context of that background, they had done a number of assessments that they're not all here, which involved initial mapping. They used DJ Screen, they used CDC, SVI, and Places. I think they used Places. They used an index map that they had developed specifically to address air quality concerns along with health measures. That was an index they used. And so all of those sort of converged and showed and just sort of verified and that this was an area in the vicinity of the permit that was a significant EJ area right off the bat. A lot of convergence on that point. in terms of the community engagement, they started to have a bunch of meetings, different kind of outreach. They did newspaper releases, they had public meetings, and they had a number of these meetings, which were working meetings, where they developed a pathways diagram. They started to describe it, and then it got refined as things went on. And so it incorporated the community concerns about traffic and noise and jobs, right? Because the community is concerned about, benefits and burdens. So there was a positive factor about jobs, I believe. And so, there was a lot of information there, as you can see, that led to different health outcomes of concern, like mental health and well-being, quality of life associated with noise and odors, right? So none of this stuff is like related to the permit, but not the chemicals, right? It's not like the chemical or toxics exposure, right? It's noise, it's risks of fire, economic security, crashes, damage to roads. So you could see like the strong incorporation of the community's concerns there. And so the meetings went further, and there was a mapping, I don't know how to hide this thing, of the prioritization of the number of the level of concern for the different factors. And so they had that kind of prioritization through polling that was done. Then they had a review of, I'd say, over 100 indicators that was done to just sort of further characterize the levels of concern and identify the main levels of concern for exposures. There was a risk assessment done. There was an ATSDR risk and exposure assessment done. So part of that, the assessment side. On the design side, right, that was driven by the pathways diagram, and then consults with the experts. They hired Tetra Tech as their consultant, and so they did a comprehensive risk assessment. Risk assessment really didn't show concerns, particularly with the chemical exposure, I believe. And so the conceptual framework you see here, the policies involved were the land use and zoning being a big factor, and the environmental regulations and permitting, community conditions, right? Of course, the neighborhood environment and the social conditions leading to the health status and overall well-being, physical and mental health. So it just kind of helps to, clarify and simplify what the focus is in discussions with the community. So then they, it's actually kind of talks a little bit about the details there. And, I don't think I have that final outcome, which it has to be there, right? It's, yeah, here we go. Huh, cool. So, so what they did was they, and that, sorry about this, but like I said, it's not really been mapped out. So I'm jumping a little bit, but on the design side with the scoping, there was the identification of the focus area, the geographic area of concern. And so they talked about how they did that and which specific groups and vulnerable populations had the most exposure to pollution, to noise, and such quality of life factors. And then just, the community members and folks that themselves were just the most concerned. So they kind of considered those and developed these focus communities within that area, the East Side, Hedgewich, and South Deering. After a number of meetings with the community, And now sort of we've done this, the scoping, we've done the assessment, right? We've got all of that risk assessment. We've got the pathways diagram that was refined. We've got the community priorities. We've got a review of 100 some indicators. We got the ATSDR risk profiling. We've got all of the index scores and values. And then we've got, which, you know, I kind of missed these parts, but there was a literature review because there was a lot of information and new research about the types of recycling facilities and that the type of issues associated with an expanded facility. Lots of good details that come out in the literature that helped clarify what to focus on. Then there was also, there was also the permit itself, the application had a lot of technical information. So all of this kind of fed into the scoping and then the assessment. So after that, and then the engagement meetings, we moved to focusing on, you know, delineating what those impacts of concern are. And again, this is kind of the nice organizational structure that would break it down. So what are the quality of life impacts of concern? You know, and you see here, right, it's broken out. This is mixed methods was started to be introduced here, and they talked about that, as well as when these things were being considered, a racial equity impact assessment was involved. And so they broke it out, right? Quality of life. So traffic and street noise, I think it is, lost my spot. The economic development, job opportunity, the noise, I think traffic and street danger and accidents, noise, and then concentration of industry, right? Because in terms of this equity and historical overburden, it's not just emissions, it's not just toxics and risks, it's just also the burden of overdevelopment and overconcentration relative to you know, areas of less economic hardship and all. So then in terms of the mixed methods piece, they started to do more of a subjective ranking based on a review of the information. What of these impacts were the most concern, and what did we see as the level of impact, and the positive or negative. So they ranked, you know, concentration of impact, concentration of industry as a negative impact, and it was identified as a clear negative impact, right? Not a potential. So they sort of mapped these things out, and then they discussed the source that they based that ranking on most strongly. They did the same thing with environmental impacts. Again, like referring to all of the information that was provided and the group meetings and discussion with the experts, the risk assessors and so forth. They talked about the pollution and pollution sources and pollution risks from explosions and fires and releases of and exposures to the chemicals and associated with that. And the same type of mixed methods approach where they use the different sources of information and collectively in a group to determine the degree, the type of impact, then the degree of impact and the level of certainty of the impact. Now, I know in some of the HIAs there's a lot of other pieces that are considered, and you know I don't know that they necessarily specifically looked at those things like you know, magnitude and severity and duration and things like that. But I think those are pretty implicitly incorporated. Last one they did, right? So this is kind of the structure, and this is a structure that's in the process diagram, sorry. So talking about, now this, you know, this doesn't necessarily map out the regulatory, non-regulatory and other, but that comes later. So then the health impacts, right? Cancer, acute, chronic, non-cancer, and mental health and well-being. And then they describe those risks and concerns and summary of the data, highlights of the data, highlights of the most areas of concern identified by the data. Same type of mixed methods review and assessment, same type of justification and evidence base for those qualitative decisions and rankings. And then kind of potential mitigations and permit decisions, conditions. And so, they've sort of made these different, mitigation ideas and strategies for the 4 different areas of priority focus. A lot of these were not necessarily regulatory, right? So, improve, improve and make public the street to redirect truck traffic, things like that. Because again, like this is intended to be to cover non-regulatory concerns as well as regulatory, as well as EPA regulations. So it gives the community voice. It lets the community help and participate and empower and move the process forward, become educated, become informed, and understand how they can then move forward to participate in their own health and growth as a community. Final permit decision based on a review of all of the effects and in the context of the vulnerabilities of the population and the historical overburden, as well as the civil rights considerations and the history of noncompliance at times with the facility, the permit was denied. So just read through these real quick. So the Department of Public Health determined, I'm sorry, you see to read them? I'm sorry?
I think it was feedback. Go ahead. Someone's unmuted.
Okay, so just to read through these, I know everyone can see them, but I know it helps me and just really focusing, because this is like the final result. So an unacceptable risk that the proposed facility would produce an increase in particulate matter, noise, diesel emissions, and negative effects, which are magnified in the vulnerable community, which had existing exposures, existing health disparities, and a host of historical injustices and overburden. The interaction between the potential adverse changes in air quality, primarily driven by the particulate matter, and the quality of life caused by the operations and health vulnerabilities, together with the applicant's track record, basically that summation of information presented an unacceptable risk. And then finally, they cited racial equity concerns, including the existing of 2 civil rights complaints under Title VI. And so the permit was rejected. They made the recommendations. So increasing monitoring, enforcement, environmental protections for the southeast side. Again, like they have a history of non-compliance. So the monitoring and the enforcement is really like a stopgap or a measure to ensure that the community is protected. They embedded cumulative impact principles in the zoning, permitting, and enforcement, engage the community in decision making. So this is part of the decision-scape concept that we're talking about. Not just a permit, not just a pollutant, but the decisions that are made that permeate and throughout all of the different aspects that result in the systemic overburden and injustice, and to expand and enhance the use of health and racial equity impact assessments to inform decision making. So that's sort of always a good thing, and I think a lot of folks don't necessarily know the resources and so forth. And then there's the community reaction, right, which is they celebrate decision, but they continue to deal with the toxic legacy, and they will continue to fight and advocate for the healthy community, healthy environments and communities. So that's, they didn't really focus a lot on the monitoring and reporting. They sort of left that off to be addressed, by the Department of Public Health, and figure it out that way.
Well,
There
what
was,
happened? What
I'm sorry.
happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what people should know is that the CDPH went on took a set of actions working with different communities to replicate the general iron analysis in other communities, and then they're also working to advance a cumulative impact ordinance for the city. So, and thirdly, there was a set of actions they're doing in terms of addressing some of these upstream factors, like zoning. So there is definitely a set of actions that are taken beyond just the permit decision. So Sandra, do you want us to go back now to the
Yeah. I think that example was really useful to give folks something to hang that on. So let's go back to the model now.
Yeah, because I think that this gives us a lot of lessons in terms of how to better present this, because we can what we need to do is marry these two things so people can see this directly next to each other. But you can see generally how it is, and how these play out. So I don't know, we want to start with stop and get some questions if anybody have any.
I don't see any hands. Kingsley, did you get your question answered? I saw your hand was up a little bit ago.
Thank you, Charles, for that wonderful presentation. I don't know if you can hear me. Confirm you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
All right. Thanks, Rich. I also wanted to touch around the tools, especially in the impact assessment and the monitoring plans. Are there specific tools? I hear the sample you just talked about around the ironing industry. Are there some sort of monitoring tools you've deployed to check effectiveness of deployment of management plans or implementation of management plans in case studies? I also see a lot of collaboration of EPA with other government agencies, and I wanted to also check, have there been further collaboration with independent studies or independent consultants working for the industrial organizations or production companies, either in production sector or in the oil and gas sector?
Let's see, there's a number of questions, right? In terms of monitoring, Rich, did you have any thoughts about monitoring?
Well, I think monitoring is an area with a lot of exploration going on. We are typically, we in the EPA side have specific regulations for monitoring. So, we have the air quality monitors for the NOx. We have monitors for the air toxics. We don't, and then of course permit permit limits and monitors. And so those are,
I just imagine how
collected,
stressful that feels.
because there's a collected, under permit requirements. As far as like, in terms of a local monitoring within communities, that's more on a case by case basis, and that, there's not always direct authority to do that. So that's, like I said, it's somewhat exploratory, and different mechanisms are being used and looked at, sort of in pilots. As far as specific case studies, I think there are some. I would have to look into them. I think South Philadelphia Refinery is one, where they were able, and another, I think there were a number in Philadelphia where EPA found different mechanisms, maybe working with partners like the Clean Air Council, to put monitors right in communities to get the kind of data that you really couldn't, like, say ozone or near field particulate. We don't monitor that, right? So obviously there's all kind of potential variations that are health significant that we don't get. And I think that's what you were getting at with that kind of monitoring. So yeah, we're trying hard to move in that direction. And I could look for the South Philadelphia examples. One of our epidemiologists, Carol Ann Gross Davis, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was involved in that.
There's another question. Elmer, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, I was just trying to relate to the recent incident that I heard on the news regarding toxic air concerns at the Louisiana school, and that was with the Dinka plant. That it was related to emission of harmful levels of chloroprene. So I was wondering, because this impact assessment seems like it could be a good scenario for applying for this. So I was curious if EPA is involved in this case. Thank you.
Charles?
Yeah, EPA is involved in a lot. Yeah, I'm not totally sure I have anything to share, because there's so many things that are taking place. But clearly there is, and I think we'll all know more as things unfold.
Charles, would you say it's fair to say that some of this is involved in litigation and civil rights, potentially civil rights
Yes,
litigation? So it's a little more complex in terms of what we can do, will do.
Yeah, clearly there are Title VI complaints filed around the facility. There's other things that are taking place. So so it is really I think it's an issue that has whose time has come, because it's been long. This type of attention has been sorely needed for a long time. I think
I don't see hands.
There's two hands that are raised.
Oh, Raquel and Jesse.
Yeah.
Hi, I can go. This is Jessie Carr from the Minnesota Department of Health. Thank you for this presentation. I wanted to go back in the process diagram. I think it was, Charles, when you were talking about the analysis design, or maybe in the analysis methods, you referred to 10 disparity indicators that the EPA was coming out with or were already out. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about those 10 indicators. Thank you.
Yeah, Rich, why don't you talk about those 10 indicators?
Sure. So under the EJ Equity Action Plan, that there are a number of goals set out. And so one of them is the cumulative impact framework that, where this is all basically about. And then another is the what they call the 10 disparity indicators, which is basically to say, okay, EPA, you're working on environmental justice, but how are you measuring success? And so, it's like a big challenge, right? Because, you've got to sort of incorporate so many factors. How frequently would something change, for example, or there are sort of obviously there's implementation side, like the number of grants issued, number of dollars issued, the number of dollars issued, and areas identified for cumulative impacts or high ranking vulnerability, things like that. But in this case, the measures, I was trying to find them, are really kind of cool. It's really innovative and new, and they basically, I'm trying to get this up here. They basically cover measures of, let's say, air quality changes in particulate matter in relation to the number of people in vulnerable areas that are exposed to levels below the standard. So I guess the scenario overall is it's focused on areas of high poverty, high percentage people of color, right? So there's like typical EJ kind of factors to indicate some degree to indicate disparity, and then either measures that show lack of resources in the case of green space, or show overburden in terms of blood lead above standard, or percent of children measured, or show air quality exposures that are of concern for these areas of existing disparity for environmental justice concerns. So I have those indicators. I can't find them now. I think that would be a really cool thing to kind of look at in the future. They're certainly in like development, you could say. So I don't think there's something that like folks want to basically show around widely or something. But I could check with folks, and I think that the proposed examples are that's the idea. So a set of indicators that EPA can show progress in the areas of environmental justice. And at the national level, there was a whole set of criteria, and one of them was that they're scalable, so that it's not just a number for the country, but it could be scalable at least down to the county, things like that. And then of course all the data quality concerns, and then of course concerns about are you going to measure something that doesn't change until 5 years? So lots of considerations went into it. Like, it's a pretty big effort. So
Thank you for that, Rich. I see that Dr. Silva has her hand up. Raquel?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this talk. It's been really informative. And I did have a question. If you could elaborate on the cross-agency efforts and links to the Justice 40 implementation that's ongoing. I was thinking, for example, about housing, energy planning, how you saw these cross-agency connections. And the very specific question I may as well add on was about if there were any preferred tools for reporting and monitoring, because I didn't catch one of the tools that was mentioned, but I also didn't understand if they were mentioned just as examples, or if they were preferred tools for some standardization, which would make sense to me. Thank
Right,
you.
but you're talking about tools to measure the implementation of Justice 40, right? Which has to do with how do you measure the benefits that are being directed towards disadvantaged communities, right? Is that
Yes.
is
So in terms of tools, yes. And
I
in terms
mean
of the
I mean
process overall about those
yeah.
connections with other agencies.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a huge question, right? I mean, I think that,
Sorry.
originally when Justice 40 started, there wasn't a real uniform tool. And so a lot of each agency went and started using, were using tools that were in existence. Like, for example, EPA used EJ Screen because it was in existence. And then the White House Council on Environmental Quality developed the CJUST, the Climate and Economic Justice screening tool, and that's becoming more of the standard, as being used. I think the question that you have in terms of like how do you start to measure benefits, that's a whole set of questions. But then I think the other part of the question, which because of the focus on cumulative impacts, I've started to think about this from the other perspective: is what does it look like in a community? And when you talk about what does it look like, the how does that then factor into cross-agency work or multiple agency work, because it's the communities. There are, I think, certain, at least this is an EPA or certain parts of the EPA, thinking started about looking at cumulative impacts in the community from an area-wide perspective. And and then when you start to do that, what are things that are necessary, and what do you bring into bear, right, to address cumulative impacts? I mean, I think it goes beyond just the making decisions around environmental issues, but also housing issues and transportation issues and things like that. EPA has started a number of kind of demonstration pilot type initiatives. One in Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is going to involve several agencies now, both in terms of the environmental, transportation, and health agencies as a beginning. And I think this is where you're going to see that collaboration and the need to have some kind of metrics for that type of work, at least on a community scale. But eventually, hopefully, this will become something that people start to think about in terms of metrics on a broader scale. But I don't know how you think about that yet.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect to your question. I'm going to take a shot at this and see. So in terms of tools in general and tools that were mentioned specifically, the number of tools seems to grow exponentially, and people are like, well, what do we do with all these tools? So on the sort of the screening side, it seems to be, simpler in some respects to just look at what's really been widely adopted, that covers like the nation, like EJ Screen and CDC's tools, as like a sort of a simple piece to have in there for some degree of consistency. Now, in terms of the types and numbers of tools, right? It's, every state seems to be working on an EJ index tool. There's other types of tools for everything, right? Like climate change tools, heat indexes. There's the, what else? Academic tools. I can't think. Oh yeah, well, just like the food desert tool from USDA. I can't even count. And EPA has tons of tools, let alone models. All the risk models and all air models, and I mean it goes on and on. So that's sort of like what we hope to work through in the analysis design, driven by the pathways. So the pathways sort of scopes the what the range and depth and the geographic area is going to start to eliminate lots of tools, because tools often have geographic scope limitations, data limitations, availability, time period, and all that. So it's not a process of elimination in some respect. And then just to comment on the government and the cross agency, yeah, I mean, that's like a hot area that's like being talked about so much. Like there's this whole of government that's like getting considerable impetus. And I know just in our work with this this whole CIA effort and things like that, we're engaging with CDC more and more all the time, just as one example. So it's really cool. They knew for them to be that involved with EPA. There's discussion of cross agency goals, or connecting those 10 disparity indicators for a broader EJ government effort. So a lot of ideas out there.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat or hands up for our presenters. So we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to give our presenters the last word this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you about this, and I'm really interested in promoting this dialogue and to continuing it, because, like I said, there's real interest, and there's going to be resources for applying cumulative impact analysis and health impact assessment. This is just one way to start to think about that. And anything that any ideas any of you have for how you build this out, whether or not there are things about the way that this is being thought about that could be strengthened. There are things in here that don't make sense, or maybe should not be here, or should be improved. We really want to hear about that.
And I would just add that that just in these conversations and the expertise and experience that you all share, and Sandra, just been incredible learning from all of your expertise and knowledge in all of these areas. So I think there's a lot more to build on and to learn, and it's a real growing area. It's not it's people. There's no expert, and so we're all just trying to it's a learning process, and I think we're in the earlier stages, so it's exciting and great to have experts like yourself to advance all this.
Well, I learned something new every time I talk to you guys, to be honest with you. We are going to keep this conversation and this open dialogue going between SOPHIA and the EPA as you all work more on this model and put some projects on the ground with your funding. Aurelia had a question. Aurelia, it was called Paiste EH is the other tool. It's protocol for assessing excellence in community excellence and environmental health. And thank you to our presenters, and thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. If you enjoyed this webinar and you're not currently a member of SOPHIA, consider joining us. We will be having a lot more engagement around this topic and other topics having to do with HIA and health and all policies, and really trying to move this emerging conversation forward. So thank you again to Rich and Charles for giving us your time and your expertise today. And thank you to all of you for joining. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.